You people always think we don't notice." The words cut through the quiet like the sharp click of the security camera above the door, its tiny red light blinking in steady intervals, as if it were watching more closely than anyone else in the room. Marcus Reed froze mid-step, the glass refrigerator door still open behind him, a faint hum of cold air brushing against the back of his neck, his fingers wrapped loosely around a bottle of water that suddenly felt heavier than it should have. The bell over the entrance gave a soft, delayed chime as another customer walked in, but no one moved, no one spoke, the entire store settling into a strange, suspended silence that pressed in from all sides. Daniel Whitmore stood behind the counter, phone already in his hand, thumb hovering just above the screen like the decision had been made long before this moment, his jaw tight, eyes fixed, not curious but certain, the kind of certainty that didn't ask questions. "Put it back," he said, voice lower now but sharper, controlled in a way that made it worse. "I saw you take something." Marcus blinked once, slow, steady, like he was trying to keep his breath even, the fluorescent lights above reflecting faintly off the polished floor beneath his worn sneakers. His hoodie slightly damp from the late afternoon drizzle outside, the fabric clinging just enough to make him aware of himself in a way he hadn't been a minute ago. "I didn't take anything, sir," he said, not loud, not defensive, just clear, his voice carrying across the narrow aisles lined with neatly stacked snacks and canned goods that suddenly felt too orderly, too still. Somewhere near the back, a woman paused with a basket in her hand, her eyes flicking between them, unsure, while the old ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, its soft ticking the only sound daring to continue. Daniel exhaled through his nose, a short, dismissive breath, already dialing, already turning slightly away like the outcome didn't depend on anything Marcus said next. "Yeah," he spoke into the phone, gaze still locked forward. "I've got a situation here. Possible shoplifting." The word hung in the air, heavier than it should have been, settling into the corners of the store like dust. Marcus shifted his weight just slightly, not stepping back, not stepping forward, his grip on the bottle, loosening as he slowly placed it on the counter, careful, deliberate, the plastic making the faintest tap against the surface. The camera above captured everything, the angle unchanging, indifferent, the lens reflecting a distorted version of the scene below, where Marcus looked smaller, where Daniel looked taller, where the space between them stretched wider than it really was. Outside, a distant siren began to rise, faint at first, almost easy to ignore, but growing, inch by inch, threading its way into the silence until it became impossible not to hear. Marcus lowered his hands to his sides, palms open, his eyes dropping for just a second to the counter where a small glass jar sat near the register, labeled in black marker. Community Fund, a few crumpled bills and coins inside catching the light. He had added to it just minutes ago, quietly, without anyone noticing, the soft rustle of a dollar bill slipping in lost beneath the hum of the fridge. Now, no one mentioned it. No one saw it. Daniel turned slightly, pacing once behind the counter, his reflection flickering across the security monitor mounted near the back wall, the screen divided into small squares of black and white footage, each one recording, each one remembering. "Just stay right there," Daniel said, not looking at Marcus this time, but the command still landed, firm, final. Marcus didn't argue. He didn't move. He just stood there, breathing slow, steady, as the sound of the approaching siren grew louder, filling the space that words no longer could, while above them, the camera kept blinking, watching, capturing every second that no one else seemed willing to truly see. The siren did not rush in all at once. It crept closer, stretching the seconds thinner, until the flashing blue lights finally painted the front windows in slow pulses that reflected across the glass refrigerator doors and the polished counter, turning everything cold and distant, like the store had been pulled out of the world and set somewhere else entirely. The bell above the door rang again, sharper this time, as two officers stepped inside, their presence steady, measured, their eyes scanning the room before settling on Marcus, who still stood exactly where he had been told, shoulders relaxed but unmoving, hands visible, his gaze lowered just enough to avoid looking confrontational, but not enough to seem ashamed. Daniel straightened behind the counter, his posture shifting into something more formal, more certain, like the authority he had borrowed now felt reinforced, his voice quick to fill the space before anyone else could. "That is him," he said, pointing, not aggressively, but with the kind of confidence that did not leave room for doubt. "I saw him take something and try to walk out." One of the officers nodded slightly, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just acknowledging, his attention turning to Marcus as he stepped closer, the soft creak of his boots against the tile echoing louder than it should have. "Sir, I am going to need you to stay right here while we sort this out," the officer said calmly, his tone even, practiced, as if he had said these exact words 100 times before. Marcus lifted his eyes just enough to meet the officer's face for a brief second, then gave a small nod, slow and controlled. "I already paid," he said, his voice quiet but steady, the words landing without force, without urgency, as if he knew they might not be enough. The second officer moved toward the counter, glancing at the register, then at Daniel. "Do you have a receipt or any proof of what was taken?" he asked, his voice neutral, his expression unreadable. Daniel hesitated for half a second, just long enough for something small to flicker across his face, then shook his head. "No, but I know what I saw," he replied, firmer now, as if repeating it made it more solid. Behind them, the woman with the basket shifted her weight, her fingers tightening around the handle, her eyes lingering on Marcus for a moment longer before drifting away, unsure where to land. The hum of the refrigerator returned to the foreground, steady and indifferent, while the security monitor in the corner continued to cycle through its silent frames, each one capturing a version of the truth no one had looked at yet. Marcus kept his hands at his sides, his fingers barely moving, his breathing slow, controlled, like he was holding something back that no one else could see, his reflection faintly visible in the glass of the front door where the flashing lights outside blurred into streaks of blue and red. "What exactly did you see him take?" the first officer asked, turning slightly toward Daniel, giving him space to answer but not pushing him forward. Daniel opened his mouth, then paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as if replaying the moment in his mind, but the image did not come back as clearly as it had felt before. "Something from the cooler," he said finally, his voice less certain now, though he tried to hide it, his hand gesturing vaguely toward the aisle behind Marcus. The officer followed the motion with his eyes, then glanced back at Marcus, then again at Daniel, the silence stretching just a second longer than comfortable. "All right," the officer said slowly. "We can take a look at the camera footage and clear this up." The words hung there, simple, reasonable, almost obvious, yet something in the room shifted the moment they were spoken, like a door had quietly opened that no one had expected to walk through. Daniel's gaze flickered, just for a moment, toward the small monitor in the corner, where the grainy black and white images continued to loop, patient, waiting, while Marcus remained still, his voice no louder than before as he repeated, "I paid." And this time, it was not just a statement. It was something else, something heavier, something that settled into the space between them and refused to move. Daniel did not move right away, even after the officer spoke. Even after the suggestion hung in the air long enough to feel like an expectation, his eyes still fixed somewhere between Marcus and the counter, as if choosing where to look mattered more than what came next, the faint hum of the security monitor growing louder in the silence as it cycled through its quiet, unblinking frames. The officer took a small step toward the back wall, glancing at the screen, then back at Daniel, waiting, not impatient, just present, while the second officer remained near Marcus, not restraining him, not touching him, just standing close enough to signal that this moment still belonged to procedure. Marcus shifted his gaze slightly, just enough to follow the movement toward the monitor, his expression unchanged, calm in a way that did not invite sympathy, only attention, his breathing still even, his posture steady like he had already decided he would not let this moment pull him out of himself. "We can clear it up quickly," the officer said again, softer this time, almost like an offer instead of a directive, his hand gesturing lightly toward the screen. Daniel swallowed, a small motion, almost invisible, his fingers tightening briefly around the edge of the counter before releasing, his shoulders lifting and settling as he finally stepped out from behind the register, each step toward the back of the store sounding louder than it should have, the soles of his shoes pressing against the tile with a dull, measured rhythm. The monitor flickered as he approached, its grayscale images shifting from one angle to another. The entrance, the aisles, the cooler, each frame a quiet witness to what had already happened, to what no one had yet chosen to see. Daniel reached the small control panel beneath the screen, his hand hovering over the buttons, uncertain now in a way that had not existed minutes ago, the confidence in his voice replaced by something thinner, something that did not fill the room the same way. Behind him, the officer leaned slightly closer, watching, not intervening, while the woman with the basket slowly set it down on the floor beside her, the plastic rustling faintly, as if even that small sound felt out of place. Marcus remained near the front, his reflection still faintly visible in the glass, the flashing lights outside beginning to fade as the siren cut off, leaving behind a quieter, heavier silence that settled deeper than before. Daniel pressed a button, and the footage paused, then rewound, the timestamp numbers shifting backward in small, steady increments, the motion mechanical, precise, indifferent to what it might reveal. "There," Daniel said, though his voice no longer carried the same certainty, his finger pointing at the screen as the image stabilized on Marcus entering the store, shoulders slightly hunched from the rain, water droplets visible on his hoodie under the harsh ceiling lights. The officer nodded once. "Let it play," he said. Daniel hesitated, just for a second, then pressed forward, the footage moving again, showing Marcus walking toward the cooler, opening the door, reaching in, exactly as it had appeared before. Nothing unusual, nothing hidden, just a simple action repeated now under the weight of scrutiny. The camera angle shifted as the system cycled, now showing the counter, the small glass jar, the register, the space where Daniel had been standing, and for the first time, Daniel leaned closer, his eyes narrowing not in accusation, but in focus, like he was seeing something that had been there all along but had not registered. The officer did not speak, did not interrupt, the room holding its breath in a quiet, collective pause, while Marcus stood still, his voice absent now, no longer repeating himself, as if the truth no longer needed him to say it out loud, as if it was already on its way to being seen. The screen flickered once, then steadied, the grainy footage holding its quiet truth in shades of gray, as Marcus moved through the frame with no awareness of the weight that moment would later carry, his actions simple, ordinary, almost forgettable if not for the silence now pressing in around it. Daniel leaned closer, one hand resting against the wall beside the monitor, his fingers splayed slightly as if grounding himself, his eyes tracking every movement with a focus that felt different now, sharper, but not in accusation, in doubt. The footage showed Marcus placing the bottle on the counter, his hand reaching into his pocket, pulling out a few bills, laying them down in a small, careful stack, the motion unhurried, deliberate, the kind of movement that did not ask for attention and therefore never received it. The officer shifted his weight slightly behind Daniel, his gaze fixed on the same screen, his presence quiet but steady, allowing the images to speak without interruption. "Keep it going," he said softly, not taking his eyes off the monitor. Daniel did not respond, but his hand moved again, pressing the control, letting the footage continue, the timestamp advancing in small, steady increments that felt louder than any sound in the room. Marcus appeared again in a different angle, the camera near the entrance capturing him stepping back from the counter, his head turning slightly, as if noticing something on the floor, his body pausing in a way so brief it could have been missed entirely in real time. Daniel's breath caught, almost imperceptibly, as Marcus bent down, reaching toward the tile near the base of the counter where something small had fallen, something that did not belong to him. The camera angle did not change, but the moment sharpened, the edges of it clearer now under scrutiny, Marcus's fingers closing around a worn leather wallet, the kind Daniel had carried for years, the kind that had slipped unnoticed from the edge of the counter when he had turned away earlier, too focused on something else to realize what he had lost. Marcus held it for a second, just long enough to recognize what it was, then stood, placing it back on the counter in the exact spot where it had been before, his movement quiet, precise, without hesitation, without calling attention to himself, as if returning something was not an act worth announcing. Daniel's hand tightened against the wall, his knuckles paling as the realization began to settle, slow and heavy, the certainty he had held earlier unraveling not all at once, but thread by thread, each second of footage pulling at it until there was nothing left to hold on to. Behind him, the officer exhaled softly, not in surprise, but in understanding, the kind that came from seeing this before, from knowing how quickly assumptions could become something else. The room remained silent, no one speaking, no one moving. As the footage continued to play past the moment, showing Marcus stepping away, adjusting the strap of his backpack, heading toward the door with nothing in his hands but what he had already paid for, the bell chiming softly as he exited, the same quiet sound that had gone unnoticed before now echoing differently in Daniel's mind. He blinked once, then again, as if trying to reset what he was seeing, but the image did not change, it did not soften, it did not offer him another version of events that matched what he had believed. It simply remained, steady and undeniable, waiting for him to accept it. The officer finally spoke, his voice low, measured. "Looks like he paid," he said, not accusing, not pressing, just stating what was there. Daniel did not answer right away, his eyes still locked on the screen, replaying the moment in his mind even as it had already been shown, the weight of it settling deeper, heavier, until it reached a place he could not ignore, a place where the silence around him began to feel less like stillness and more like something he had created himself. Daniel did not realize he had stopped breathing until his chest tightened and forced a slow, uneven inhale, the air in the small back corner of the store suddenly feeling thinner, heavier, as if the truth on the screen had taken up space that oxygen used to fill. His eyes stayed locked on the frozen frame where Marcus's hand hovered over the wallet, the exact second before he placed it back, that quiet decision looping in his mind louder than any accusation he had made minutes earlier. The officer behind him shifted slightly, the faint rustle of fabric breaking the silence just enough to remind Daniel that he was not alone, that this moment was no longer private, even though it felt like it should have been. "Sir," the officer said gently, not pressing, just opening a door, "we should probably clear this up with him." The words lingered, simple, reasonable, but Daniel did not move right away, his hands still braced against the wall, his fingers slowly curling inward, as if holding on to something that had already slipped away. The monitor continued to glow in front of him, the grayscale image unwavering, patient, offering no escape, no reinterpretation, only what had actually happened. Behind him, near the front of the store, Marcus stood in the same place, though the tension around him had shifted, not gone, but changed into something quieter, something that no longer needed to defend itself. His shoulders remained relaxed, his hands still at his sides, his gaze drifting briefly toward the back where Daniel stood, not searching for validation, not demanding anything, just waiting in a way that felt heavier than any words he could have said. The second officer near Marcus glanced toward the back, then back at Marcus, his posture easing slightly, the edge of suspicion replaced with something closer to neutrality, maybe even respect. The woman with the basket picked it up again, slowly this time, her movements careful, as if she did not want to disturb whatever had just shifted in the room. Daniel finally pushed himself away from the wall, the motion small but deliberate, his shoes making that same dull sound against the tile as he stepped forward, each step carrying more weight than the last. The distance between the back corner and the front counter had never felt this long before, the familiar layout of the store now stretched by something invisible, something that made every foot of space feel like a quiet confrontation. He reached the counter and stopped, his hand resting on its edge, the same place where the wallet had fallen, where Marcus had returned it without a word, without expectation. For a moment, Daniel did not look at Marcus, his gaze fixed. Instead, on the surface of the counter, the faint scratches in the laminate, the small imperfections he had never noticed before, details that suddenly felt easier to face than the person standing a few feet away. The officer near Marcus gave a small nod toward Daniel, a silent cue, a chance to speak, to correct, to acknowledge. Daniel swallowed, the motion visible this time, his throat tightening as he finally lifted his eyes, meeting Marcus's gaze for the first time since the footage had played, and something in that look shifted again, not fully, not completely, but enough to break the certainty that had once been there. He started, the word catching, thinner than he expected, his voice no longer carrying the authority it had before. "I saw the footage." It was not an apology, Not yet, just a statement. But even that felt like more than he had been ready to give seconds earlier. Marcus did not respond right away, his expression steady, unreadable in a way that was not cold, just contained, as if he was deciding whether this moment required anything from him at all. The store remained quiet, the camera above still blinking, still recording, but now it captured something different, something slower, something that could not be undone by rewinding or replaying, only faced, one word at a time. Marcus let the silence sit for a moment after Daniel's words, not out of hesitation, but because there was nothing urgent left to say, the truth already laid out behind them on a flickering screen that no one could argue with anymore. His eyes steady, not hard, not forgiving either, just present, as if he had learned long ago that moments like this did not always end with the words people expected. The officer nearest him shifted his stance slightly, the tension in his shoulders easing now that the situation had changed shape, his voice calm as he spoke. Looks like there was a misunderstanding here. The phrase practiced, neutral, designed to move things forward without pressing too hard on what had already happened. Daniel nodded once, though the motion felt incomplete, like it belonged to someone else, his hand still resting on the counter where the wallet had once fallen, his fingers brushing lightly over the surface as if searching for something that was no longer there. He paid, Daniel said, quieter now, the words almost catching in his throat, not because they were difficult to understand, but because of what they required him to admit, his gaze flickering briefly toward the officers before settling back on Marcus, who had not moved, had not stepped closer, had not stepped away, simply waiting in a way that made the space between them feel deliberate. The second officer gave a small nod, glancing toward Marcus with a softer expression now, the edge gone from his posture, replaced with something more human, more aware. "You are free to go," he said, his tone respectful, not dismissive, as if acknowledging that Marcus had been placed in a situation he had not created. Marcus exhaled slowly, the breath barely visible, his shoulders lowering just a fraction, not in relief exactly, but in release, like something he had been holding quietly had finally been set down. He reached toward the counter, picking up the bottle of water he had placed there earlier, the plastic cool against his palm, grounding, familiar, a small reminder of why he had walked in to begin with. For a second, he looked at Daniel, not long, not searching, just enough to meet his eyes again, and in that brief exchange there was no anger, no accusation, only a quiet distance that said more than either of them could have put into words. "I told you," Marcus said, his voice steady, not raised, not sharpened, just simple, and somehow heavier because of it. Daniel opened his mouth as if to respond, but nothing came out right away, the words forming somewhere behind the weight of what he had seen, what he had assumed, what he had acted on without question. The woman with the basket stepped aside slightly, giving Marcus space as he moved toward the door, her eyes following him for a moment longer, something like regret flickering across her face before she looked away. The bell above the entrance rang softly as Marcus pushed the door open, the sound the same as before, but it lingered differently now, stretching just a little longer in the quiet that followed. Outside, the flashing lights had dimmed, the street returning to its ordinary rhythm, cars passing, distant sounds blending back into the background as if nothing had happened at all. Inside, Daniel remained where he was, his hands still on the counter, his eyes fixed on the space Marcus had just left, the absence more noticeable than the presence had been minutes ago. The officer near him cleared his throat lightly, not impatient, just signaling the end of something that had already concluded. "Have a good evening, sir," he said, turning toward the door, his partner following a step behind. The bell rang once more as they exited, leaving the store quieter than before, the hum of the refrigerator returning, steady and indifferent, while above it all, the camera continued to blink, capturing a room that looked exactly the same, but no longer felt it. The door closed behind Marcus with a soft click that felt louder than it should have, the sound lingering in the empty space like something unfinished, something that had not found its place yet. And for a moment Daniel did not move, his hand still resting on the counter, his fingers tracing the faint outline where the wallet had once been, the absence now more vivid than the object itself. The store settled slowly back into its rhythm, the low hum of the refrigerator returning, the ceiling fan ticking overhead, the fluorescent lights casting the same pale glow across the aisles, but none of it felt the same. Not after what had just unfolded in front of him. Not after what he had seen with his own eyes, and still almost refused to believe. The woman who had been holding the basket placed her items quietly on the counter, her movements careful, her gaze avoiding Daniel's as she set down a few bills, the transaction brief, silent, as if words would only make it heavier. Daniel nodded without speaking, his hands moving automatically, scanning, returning change, each motion mechanical, disconnected from the thoughts pressing in behind his eyes. She took her bag and left without another glance, the bell ringing once more, softer this time, until the store was finally empty, just him and the quiet that followed. Daniel exhaled slowly, the breath uneven, and turned his head toward the small monitor in the corner, the screen still glowing, still replaying the same sequence on a loop. Marcus entering, Marcus paying, Marcus bending down, Marcus returning what was never his, over and over again without commentary, without judgment, just truth repeating itself until it could no longer be ignored. Daniel took a step toward it, then another, drawn back into the corner. Like something unresolved was still waiting there, his reflection faint in the glass of the screen, overlapping with the image of Marcus from minutes ago, the two figures sharing the same frame, but not the same understanding. He reached out and paused the footage again, freezing it at the exact moment Marcus's hand placed the wallet down. That quiet decision captured in stillness. And for the first time Daniel noticed something else, something smaller, easier to miss. The jar near the register shifting slightly as Marcus's hand brushed past it. A single folded bill slipping inside. Subtle, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. Daniel leaned closer, his eyes narrowing, not in suspicion now, but in realization, the weight of it settling deeper, layering over everything else he had already seen. The quiet generosity that had gone completely unnoticed, that had meant nothing in the moment because no one had cared to see it. He pressed play again, watching the motion in real time, the small act blending into the background, swallowed by everything he had thought was more important. His throat tightened, the realization not sharp, not sudden, but slow, steady, the kind that did not leave quickly once it arrived. He stepped back, the screen continuing without him. And for a moment he just stood there, the store silent around him, the hum of the machines the only sound left. And in that quiet he understood something he had not allowed himself to see before. Not just that he had been wrong, but that he had not even tried to be right, that he had filled in the gaps before the truth had a chance to exist. His gaze drifted toward the door where Marcus had left, the glass now reflecting only the empty street outside. And he stayed there, looking, not expecting anything to appear, not expecting anything to change, just standing in the space where a moment had passed that he could not take back, no matter how many times the footage replayed it differently in his mind. The clock above the register ticked forward, each second sounding louder now that the store had emptied, the rhythm steady but impossible to ignore, like it was marking something more than just time passing, like it was measuring the space between what had happened and what should have happened instead. Daniel moved slowly, almost without thinking, his hands drifting back to the counter, straightening a row of candy bars that were already aligned, adjusting a receipt that did not need adjusting, small movements that filled the air but did not change anything underneath. The jar labeled Community Fund sat near the edge, the folded bill inside catching the light just enough to draw his eyes back again, pulling his attention in the same quiet way the footage had, not demanding, just present. He reached out, not to take it, not to move it, but just to touch the glass lightly with his fingertips, the surface cool, solid, real, unlike the certainty he had carried earlier that now felt thin, almost fragile in comparison. Outside, a car passed slowly, its headlights sweeping across the windows and briefly illuminating the empty aisles, the reflection sliding across the floor before disappearing again, leaving the store dim and unchanged. Daniel glanced toward the door once more, the handle still, the bell silent, no sign that anyone would come back through it. No second chance waiting just outside where he could reach it. He turned back toward the monitor again, unable to stay away for long. The footage still looping, still offering the same quiet truth without variation, without judgment, just the repetition of a moment that had already defined something he could not undo. This time he did not step as close. He stayed a few feet back, watching from a distance as if that space might make it easier to take in, but it did not. The images landing the same, steady, unchanging. Marcus appeared again on the screen, walking in, head slightly lowered from the rain, moving with a kind of quiet purpose that did not ask for attention, and Daniel noticed things now he had not seen before. The way Marcus paused to hold the door open for someone behind him. The way he waited half a second longer than necessary. The small gesture unnoticed by anyone else, lost in the normal flow of the day. The footage continued, each frame layering over the last, building a version of the moment that felt more complete, more honest than the one Daniel had reacted to in real time. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping, the weight settling deeper, not sharp anymore, but constant, like something that would not leave quickly. His gaze drifted from the screen to the front of the store, to the path Marcus had taken, from the cooler to the counter to the door, a simple line, nothing complicated, nothing hidden, just a straight path that had somehow become something else in Daniel's mind. He walked that same path now, slowly, stopping at the cooler, opening the door, feeling the rush of cold air against his face, then closing it again, the sound dull, final. He stepped to the counter, resting his hand where Marcus had placed the money, where he had returned the wallet, where he had given something without being seen, and Daniel stayed there for a moment longer than necessary, his fingers pressing lightly into the surface as if trying to understand it through touch. When he finally looked up, his reflection stared back at him from the glass door, not distorted, not unclear, just plain, and for the first time that night, he did not look away immediately. He held that gaze, quiet, steady, as if recognizing something in it that had been there all along, but had only now come into focus. The store felt different now, not because anything had changed on the shelves or the lights or the quiet hum of the machines, but because Daniel could not stand in it the same way anymore. Every corner holding a version of the moment he had misread, every surface carrying the weight of something he had decided before he had seen, and it stayed with him as he moved behind the counter again, slower this time, more aware of each step, each sound, like the space itself was asking him to pay attention, in a way he had not before. He reached for the register, pressing a few buttons without purpose, the screen lighting up and dimming again, numbers appearing and disappearing, none of it holding his focus for more than a second before his eyes drifted back to the jar, to the monitor, to the door, the same 3 points pulling him in a quiet loop he could not break. He opened the register drawer, not because he needed anything from it, but because it gave his hands something to do, the metal sliding out with a soft click, bills neatly stacked, coins separated into their trays, everything in its place, everything accounted for, and yet the one thing that had mattered earlier had not been accounted for at all. He closed it again, the sound sharper this time, echoing slightly in the empty store, and stood there for a moment with his hands resting on the counter, his fingers spread, his gaze fixed somewhere just beyond the surface, as if trying to see through it. The clock ticked forward again, steady, unchanging, and Daniel glanced up at it, watching the second hand move in small, precise steps, each one carrying him further away from the moment when he could have chosen differently, when he could have paused, asked, looked, instead of deciding. Outside, the sky had darkened, the last light of evening fading into a deep blue that reflected faintly in the glass, the street quieter now, fewer cars passing, fewer chances for distraction. Daniel walked toward the door, stopping just short of it, his hand hovering near the handle but not touching it, the cool air on the other side visible only in the slight fogging of the glass where his breath met it. He looked out, scanning the sidewalk, the parking lot, the dim outlines of buildings across the street, but there was no sign of Marcus, no figure lingering, no pause in the distance that might offer him a way to step outside and say something that would matter. The moment had already moved on, carried forward by time in the same steady rhythm as the clock behind him, leaving him standing in a place that looked unchanged but felt entirely different. He turned back slowly, the bell above the door remaining still, silent, and walked once more toward the back where the monitor continued its quiet cycle, the images repeating without awareness of what they meant, without pause, without judgment. Daniel watched again, not because he expected something new to appear, but because he could not look away, the footage now less like evidence and more like a mirror, reflecting not just what Marcus had done, but what he himself had failed to do. He leaned against the wall this time, not bracing, just resting, his arms hanging loosely at his sides, his shoulders no longer tense but heavy, settled under something he could not set down. The image on the screen moved through its sequence once more, Marcus entering, paying, returning, leaving, each action simple, clear, complete, and Daniel stayed there until the loop reached the end again, until the frame reset, until the same beginning appeared once more, unchanged. And in that repetition, he understood that the footage would always show the truth exactly as it was, but it would never change the fact that he had not seen it when it mattered most. The night settled deeper outside, the glass of the storefront turning from a window into a mirror, reflecting the inside back at itself, doubling the empty aisles, the quiet counter, the lone figure of Daniel, standing still, as if the store had closed around him without anyone announcing it. He finally reached up and turned the lock on the door, the small metallic click sounding deliberate. Final, the sign flipping to closed with a soft tap against the glass, though the store had already felt that way long before he made it official. The overhead lights dimmed slightly as he switched off half of them, leaving only the rows above the counter and the back wall glowing, the rest of the space fading into soft shadow, the edges of the aisles less defined, the details less sharp, but not gone. Daniel walked back toward the monitor again, slower now, not pulled by urgency, but by something quieter, something that felt like obligation, like he owed the truth more than a passing glance. He stopped a few feet away, arms crossed loosely, his weight shifting onto one leg as he watched the footage begin again, the timestamp rolling back, the same sequence starting from the beginning, unchanged, unaffected by how many times he had already seen it. Marcus entered again, the door opening, the bell ringing, the same small sound that now seemed to echo longer in Daniel's memory than it ever had in the moment, and Daniel found himself noticing the pause again, that half-second where Marcus held the door for someone else, a gesture that had meant nothing to him before, but now stood out, clear and undeniable. The footage continued, steady, patient, showing Marcus moving through the store with no hesitation, no urgency, just purpose, and Daniel felt something shift again, not sharp, not sudden, but deeper, more settled, like understanding replacing assumption piece by piece. He stepped closer this time, leaning slightly forward, his eyes narrowing not out of doubt but focus, watching Marcus reach into his pocket, place the money down, the bills slightly crumpled, the motion careful, respectful in a way that had gone completely unseen. Daniel's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in something closer to regret, the kind that did not come with noise, only with quiet recognition. The frame moved forward, showing the wallet fall, the small, unnoticed slip from the counter, and Daniel felt it again, that subtle shift in his chest, that awareness that this entire moment had been built on something he had not even realized had happened. Marcus bent down again on the screen, picking it up, returning it without pause, without hesitation, and Daniel exhaled slowly, his breath visible only in the slight movement of his shoulders, the weight of that simple action pressing in on him more than anything else. He reached out and paused the footage again, freezing it at that exact second, the image holding steady, Marcus's hand extended, the wallet just about to leave his fingers and return to its place. Daniel stared at it, longer this time, not searching for anything new, just letting it exist, letting it settle, letting it stay exactly as it was without trying to change it or reinterpret it. The store was silent except for the low hum of the machines, the ticking clock, the faint buzz of the lights overhead, all of it steady, all of it indifferent, and in that quiet Daniel realized something that did not need to be spoken out loud, something that did not need to be explained, only accepted. He had not just been wrong. He had been certain while being wrong, and that certainty had been louder than the truth standing right in front of him. His hand dropped slowly from the control panel, the screen still frozen, the image unchanged, and for the first time since the moment had begun, he did not press play again. He did not rewind. He did not try to see it differently. He just stood there, letting the still frame remain, letting the silence stretch, knowing that nothing he did next could bring back the moment when seeing clearly would have mattered most. Daniel stood there longer than he realized, the still image on the monitor quietly holding him in place. the frozen frame of Marcus returning the wallet becoming something more than just a moment. It felt like a line he had already crossed without knowing, one that he could not step back over no matter how long he stared at it. The store around him remained dim, half-lit, the hum of the machines steady and unchanged, the clock continuing its quiet march forward, indifferent to whether he moved or not. He finally exhaled and reached out, not to press play, but to turn the monitor off completely, the screen going dark in an instant, his reflection replacing the footage, clearer now without the distraction of motion, his own face staring back at him in the absence of Marcus's image. For a second, he held that gaze, not flinching this time, not looking away, just seeing himself without anything to filter it through, and there was something heavier in that reflection than anything the footage had shown. He turned slowly and walked back toward the counter, his steps quieter now, more deliberate, as if the store required something different from him than it had before. The jar still sat near the edge, the folded bill inside catching the dim light, and this time he picked it up, holding it in his hand, feeling the small weight of it, the simplicity of it, something given without being seen, without being acknowledged, and he let that settle in a way he had not allowed himself to before. He set the jar back down carefully, not in the exact same spot, but closer to the register, where it would be harder to overlook, a small adjustment that did not change what had happened but felt like a quiet refusal to ignore it again. Daniel glanced toward the door, the glass reflecting only the darkened street outside, and for a moment he stood there as if considering something, his hand lifting slightly before dropping again, the distance between where he was and where Marcus had gone feeling larger than it should have been. He moved behind the counter and reached for a small notepad, the kind he used for inventory, flipping it open to a blank page, the paper clean, untouched, waiting. He picked up a pen and held it there for a second, the tip hovering just above the surface, his thoughts not forming into sentences easily, not arranging themselves into something simple or clean. When he finally pressed the pen down, the first word came slowly, uneven, as if it did not belong to him at first, but he kept writing, not stopping to correct, not stopping to think too much about how it sounded, just letting the words exist in the only way they could now. He did not write much, just a few lines, short, direct, the kind of words that did not try to explain everything, only to acknowledge something that had already been seen. He tore the page out carefully, folding it once, then again, the creases sharp under his fingers, and held it there for a moment before setting it down on the counter, right where Marcus had stood earlier, placing it in the space that now felt marked by something more than just a transaction. The store remained quiet, unchanged in every visible way, but the air in it felt different, heavier but also clearer, like something had finally settled into place. Daniel stepped back, looking at the folded paper, then at the door, then at the empty space between them, and for the first time that night, his posture shifted not with uncertainty, but with a quiet decision forming, not loud, not dramatic, just present, as steady as the ticking clock behind him. The paper sat exactly where he had placed it, a small folded square against the wide, empty counter, its presence quiet but undeniable, like a voice that did not need to speak to be heard. Daniel stood behind it for a long moment, his hands resting at his sides, his eyes moving between the note and the door as if measuring something that could not be seen, something that did not follow the same rules as everything else in the store. The clock ticked again, steady, unchanging, and this time he did not ignore it. He moved, not quickly, not with urgency, but with a kind of clarity that had not been there before, stepping out from behind the counter, his path direct, no hesitation in the way he crossed the floor toward the door. The bell remained still as he reached for the handle, his fingers wrapping around it, pausing just long enough for one last glance back at the counter, at the note, at the space where everything had shifted, and then he pushed the door open. The night air met him immediately, cooler than he expected, carrying the faint scent of rain still lingering on the pavement, the street quieter now, the earlier noise gone, replaced by a softer rhythm of distant cars and the occasional passing breeze. He stepped outside, letting the door close behind him with a muted click, the sound of the bell softer this time, almost swallowed by the open space. For a moment, he stood there on the sidewalk, looking left, then right, his eyes adjusting to the dim streetlights, searching not with panic, not with desperation, but with a quiet intention that felt heavier than either of those. The parking lot stretched out in front of him, mostly empty, the asphalt still damp, reflecting the overhead lights in broken, uneven patches. There was no immediate sign of Marcus, no figure waiting, no clear direction to follow. Just the open space and the understanding that he was late, not in minutes, but in something harder to measure. Daniel took a step forward anyway, then another, moving past the edge of the storefront, his gaze scanning the sidewalk, the corner, the bus stop a short distance away where a single bench sat under a flickering light. As he approached, he slowed slightly, noticing a figure sitting there, shoulders relaxed, a backpack resting at his feet, a bottle of water in his hand catching the light as he lifted it for a small sip. Marcus. Daniel stopped a few feet away, the distance between them filled with everything that had already happened, everything that could not be undone, and for a second, he did not speak, his breath visible in the cool air, his hands empty at his sides. Marcus looked up, his expression calm, not surprised, not expectant, just aware, as if he had already decided how much this moment would matter to him. The streetlight above cast a soft glow, outlining the space between them, the quiet settling again, but this time it felt different, less like pressure, more like something waiting. Daniel shifted his weight slightly, his throat tightening just enough to remind him that words would not come easily, not after everything that had already been said without speaking. I was wrong, he said finally, the sentence simple, unadorned, but heavier than anything he had said before, his voice steady, not loud, not pleading, just honest in a way that did not try to fix anything, only to acknowledge it. Marcus held his gaze for a moment, the silence stretching just long enough to feel real, to carry the weight of the words without rushing past them, and in that space, nothing else moved, not the air, not the light, not the distance between them, just two people standing in a moment that did not need anything more than what had already been given. Marcus did not respond right away, his eyes resting on Daniel with the same steady calm that had carried him through the store, through the accusation, through the silence that followed, and now through this moment that felt quieter but somehow more exposed. The streetlight above flickered once, then held, casting a soft glow across the bench, the damp pavement, the space between them that no longer felt as sharp, but had not disappeared either. Marcus lowered the bottle slightly, his fingers loose around it, the plastic crinkling faintly in the still air, a small sound that seemed louder because nothing else was competing with it. Yeah, he said finally, his voice even, not harsh, not forgiving, just real, the word landing without weight, but not without meaning. Daniel nodded once, slowly, as if that single word had confirmed something he already knew, something he had not needed Marcus to say, but still needed to hear. The silence returned, but it was different now, not pressing, not uncomfortable, just present, like a space that allowed things to settle instead of forcing them to move. Daniel shifted his weight slightly, his hands still empty, his posture no longer rigid, the tension that had defined him earlier replaced by something quieter, something more aware. I should have looked, he said after a moment, his voice lower this time, not directed outward as much as inward, like he was saying it as much to himself as to Marcus. Marcus watched him for a second, then gave a small nod, not in agreement, not in approval, just acknowledgement, as if he understood the sentence without needing anything more from it. A car passed in the distance, its headlights sweeping briefly across the sidewalk, the light moving over their faces and then gone again, leaving them in the softer glow of the street lamp. Marcus leaned back slightly against the bench, his shoulders relaxed, his gaze drifting for a second down the empty street before returning, not avoiding, not holding, just moving naturally, like the moment did not need to be fixed in place. Daniel glanced back toward the store, the dim interior visible through the glass, the counter faintly lit, the small, folded note resting where he had left it, a quiet reminder of something he had tried to begin but had not finished. He turned back again, the space between them unchanged, but his stance different now, less like someone standing above a situation, more like someone standing inside it. There is a note on the counter, he said, the words simple, almost uncertain, like he was not sure if they mattered. I wrote it for you. Marcus looked at him for a moment, then toward the store, his expression unreadable, not dismissive, not curious, just considering. The air between them stayed still, the night holding its quiet rhythm, the distant hum of the city barely reaching them. After a second, Marcus nodded once more, a small motion, and took another sip from the bottle, the gesture unhurried, grounding, like everything else about him. He did not stand up right away, did not move toward the store, did not close the distance, and Daniel did not ask him to. They remained where they were, two figures under a streetlight, the moment not expanding, not resolving, just existing in a way that did not need to be completed. Daniel exhaled slowly, his breath visible again in the cool air, and for the first time that night, he did not feel the need to fill the silence, did not reach for another explanation, another sentence, another attempt to reshape what had already happened. He simply stood there, present, aware, letting the quiet hold what words could not. Marcus glanced at him one last time, then out toward the street, his expression calm, unchanged, and in that stillness, nothing dramatic shifted, nothing announced itself as resolved, but something subtle settled into place, something that did not erase the past, did not fix it, but made room for something different to exist after it. The light above them stayed steady.